Today's guest is Dr. Debbie Goldman. She earned her PhD from the University of Maryland. She is a labor researcher and advocate with decades of experience in telecommunications policy and workers' rights. She has worked with the Communications Workers of America and is the author of the new book, Disconnected: Call Center Workers Fight for Good Jobs in the Digital Age. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to talk with you.
Thank you so much for being here. Why don't you go ahead and give us a summary of that amazing book that you've written?
Disconnected is a story about workers in call centers, a place that many people grit their teeth before they pick up the phone or type to chat with folks at the other end. And it really gives the story of what's going on behind the scenes, how the people who work in the call centers, the kinds of pressures they're under from their employers to try and get you off the phone as quickly as possible because they have an average talk time. They're being surveilled, and they have quotas. They have many, many metrics that they have to meet, and it's quite a challenge for them. And unfortunately, because of the way in which the employers use the digital technology, it's meant that it's bad conditions for the workers, very stressful, and also bad customer service. But while there are 4 million call center workers in the United States, a small group of them, those who work in some of the companies in the telecom industry, are represented by a union, the Communication Workers of America. And through their union, the customer service reps who are unionized have been able to negotiate and win other protections that minimize the kinds of bad working conditions that they're under. And that's what the book explores. It's really a history, goes through 50 years to explore how conditions have gotten so bad in the call centers.
Awesome. My first job when I was 18 years old was a telecommunications job where I would call people and try to sell tickets for charities and stuff like that. And I can tell you, I know exactly how stressful that job was back then. That was a long time ago. That was 27 years ago. And I will admit, I was not a very good salesperson. Oftentimes, I didn't make any sales at night, and I only worked that job for about 3 months. But I think that the stress that you're under just to make sales in that area, like I would call to say the mounted rescue in the city I grew up in. They needed donations and funding, and so they would sell tickets to these charity concerts. And having to, call people, and this is long before people were on, cell phones like we have nowadays, smartphones. So you're calling people at between 6 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night, and they're having dinner or they're busy. They just got home from work. And it's an incredibly stressful environment to be in. And like I said, I wasn't very good at it at all. But I also came up through fast food. And there's a lot of similarities between what you're saying about how you get people in and out, how they're now under this pressure to make these phone calls, make a certain amount of sales. We used to have to stand up at the end of the day, and we'd have to call out our numbers. We'd have to say in the communications, we'd have to say, they'd say, John, how many did you sell? 10. Rodney, how much did you sell? 50. It's a very competitive thing. And it's gotten even more competitive since then. And I think that, our country as a whole has moved more and more towards this. We see this with our doctors nowadays, where they only have a certain amount of time where you can sit there. And we've seen a decline in the type of customer service, for lack of a better term, with our doctors. We see in the mistakes that are made in fast food environments where people don't get their food or, it's incorrect. There's a lot that goes into the pressure and the expectations that people have when they want to make money off of these types of things. What inspired you to want to go into telecommunications and tell their story?
I was inspired because I worked for almost 30 years in the for the Communication Workers of America. I worked in the research department, and I saw the changes that were going on. One of my assignments, major assignments, was to assist our members who were the frontline service reps, mostly doing incoming calls, not the kind of telemarketing that you're talking about, which, quite frankly, John, has pretty much gone out of business,
Hmm.
partly because people can sign up and say, I don't want to get telemarketing calls. And so many people signed up that there really is very little of that going on. But what is going on is, now that we live in the kind of society where customers buy things online and they don't go into stores as much, they get their customer service over the phone, whatever it is, whether they have a billing question or want to earn a new service, or something's broken and they need to help to get it repaired. And so I worked with the Communication Workers of America, and our members, majority women who were working, not only women, but majority women who were working in the call centers, were saying conditions are getting worse and worse. Our pride in our work, our satisfaction, comes from giving good customer service. But unfortunately, because competition is now driving the structure of our industry, it's a race to the bottom. And our employers are competing with lower wage and often non-union other call center workers. And so what they're doing is using the computers, and this is in everywhere, whether you're in Amazon or fast food or a railroad worker or working from home as a work-at-home professional. Because of the capabilities of the computers, they can track every second of what you do. And an employer, therefore, is able to squeeze out any of that downtime. And they're able to measure what you're doing. There's software now that's been developed for work-at-home professionals that can look at how many keystrokes you're typing, and can use that to evaluate whether you're doing the work that you're supposed to be doing. So what got me interested was watching and listening to our members who were saying, we need help. We need stress relief. We need to have protections against abusive monitoring. We need to have protections against unreasonable sales quotas. We need to have protection against random discipline. And the union was able to negotiate some of these protections, which therefore help the workers and also allow them to provide better customer service. Of course, now the issue really is job security as well, because when you have a situation of a race to the bottom, the employers want to outsource the call center work. There are global companies now with millions of employees, with hundreds, if not thousands, of call centers around the globe. And often the calls are being sent to the cheapest location that can speak English. And it's so how can we preserve good jobs in America, and how can we help call center workers overseas so that they can improve their working conditions and their wages and benefits, and therefore we no longer will have the race to the bottom. So our union, the Communication Workers of America, has made connections with people who work in call centers in the Philippines, in the Dominican Republic, in El Salvador, in Mexico. And I talk about that in Disconnected, Call Center Workers Fight for Good Jobs in the Digital Age, a book which you can get either online or at your local bookstore. Disconnected, it's called.
And it's been out for a while, right?
It's been out for a while. Yes.
Yeah.
It basically takes a look at, I mean, you've been describing you described what's going on in fast food. You described what's going on in the medical profession, where people are frustrated that they don't have enough time to talk with their doctor because the insurance company is telling the doctors you can only talk
Yep.
to a patient for 15 minutes. All of this is what I write about is it's not just in one particular segment or one particular job or one particular industry, but this is really a phenomena that's going on because of the changes in our economy. And we've moved into what's called a financial capitalism period, in which what's driving our companies is just the highest return that they can get, shareholder value. And the CEOs want to maximize the stock price because their pay is based on raising the stock price, and that has nothing to do with reinvesting in the workers or in the quality of service. And that's
Yeah.
where we are.
Yeah, and that's I mean, you have so many good points there. Uh I've been in management in one form or another for almost 20 years now. I started managing in fast food when I was 19 years old, and now I manage a mid-size health food grocery store. The things that you're explaining are all red flags for me as a manager when dealing with employees. Micromanaging is horrific. It takes away morale, efficiency. People think, oh, the more that I micromanage, the better, the more efficient things are going to be. But that's actually the exact opposite of what you get out of that. You get a lot of people that are not invested in their job because they don't feel like it's their job. They feel like they're being told specifically to do only these things. One of the things that I always encourage in my employees, I tell them all, I'm a big fan of reading about military leaders. I've read U.S. Grant, I've read George Washington, I've read Napoleon, I've read Julius Caesar, Alexander the Great. Every one of them have something in common, and that is when they train their lieutenants, their battlefield commanders, they do not micromanage them. They expect them to go out into the field and make decisions because those people are the best at the job because they do the job. They're the best person to make decisions at the time because they are there when it happens. And so giving autonomy to your employees and allowing them to take ownership of their job is extremely important in actually having something that isn't successful specifically financially, but is successful in the manner that in which it's supposed to be. And that is providing good customer service, fixing people's problems, providing solutions. This is what the idea of, say, a customer service job is when you're calling in, and we're taking away from that. And it feels like to me that, as you said, this is a shareholder economy. The only thing that's important is how much money we make. But it feels like we're really dehumanizing the people doing the jobs. Do you feel like that's what's happening to these call center workers?
Yeah, I do. And I think that you described it well. A manager, really, we want a manager to be able to help people to do their job better. And in a call center environment, if the manager is going to listen in on the calls, not to catch the person making a mistake, but instead to say, did you try this? Here's a different way that you could do this. And people, frontline workers, want that. They also want the opportunity to learn from each other,
Mm.
to interact with each other. Hey, I had this really tough call. I didn't really know the answer. And to look over your cubicle and to say, how would you have handled it? Or do you know the answer? But unfortunately now, with the time pressures, people who are in call centers don't have the time. But the other thing that's going on right now is since COVID, during COVID, the work of customer service reps and call center folks moved to the home, and
Mm.
people are at their home. Now, they like not having to commute. So there are many people who like to do their call center job at home, but they don't want to have all of the responsibility for paying for their internet connection, for having their desk, for being they still want protections, and the union can provide that. The union also can provide connections between now these very isolated folks who are working
Mhm.
out of their homes. What is the connection? The connection is actually the union can bring people together. Oh, you're doing the same job as me for the same, and they can talk to each other. We found, let me give another example. Our union, the Communication Workers of America, also represents folks who work in the airline industry, in the customer service, in what used to be called the reservation centers. And at many of those reservation jobs once were moved home even before the COVID situation. And when some of the folks came to the union and said, we would like to be represented by a union, we want those kind of protections, we found that one of the things the union was bringing to those work-at-home agents was connection with each other.
Mm. That's very undervalued, and it seems like something that we're losing in our society. We become further and further away due to social media. I call it overstimulation and undereducation. And that is that we're constantly bombarded with all of these things to entertain and less to educate. It's why I love reading books. Books are something that you can sit down, you can enjoy, you enjoy it at your own pace. Whereas it seems as though everything else technologically is just just swipe, 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 and just constantly being given these 15 to 30 second, but they're not connection with human beings. I just recently was watching a documentary on Netflix called Join or Die, and it was about the loss of groups. Like we had the Kiwanis Club, we had the Lions, we had all of these groups that really held America together because people would go there and find human connection with other people. And so when we see things, specifically you talk about with the book, how people were taken out of this environment where they were really all working together and instead stuffed into these cubicles. And that's, there's a funny movie. I can't remember what the name of it was, but they were like, the guy comes in, he introduces him to this call center, and he goes, if you sit on this side of the place, you're Paul. If you sit on this side, you're Bob. And it was this idea that it's like, you're not somebody that anybody is concerned about you personally. You're just either Paul or you're Bob, and you need to make this many phone calls and you need to get this done in this much time. And one of the things that I really encourage in my staff at the store is connection. So we do things like we make people go to each other for coverage, right? Somebody wants a day off, they go and they ask one of their fellow employees to cover them for that day. The reason that I don't interfere in that process and a lot of people don't get it at first because they're used to corporations. They're used to, you go to the manager, he determines whether or not you get the time off, is because you start to learn how you affect the store and the people that work there with you. And you also start to get good faith capital by dealing with other people and giving them days off and saying, oh, you have a doctor's appointment? I would love to cover that for you if you could cover my Thursday for me. And when you have unions, you have this idea that you have this goal that you all believe in. You all want to be paid well. You all want to be given sick time and maternity leave. And you all want to be paid, or I said paid well. You want to have something that you're all collectively working towards. And so I think unions are really, really important in that. And what I would want to get to here with this question is, you mentioned AI earlier, and you mentioned how that's being used to monitor people or to create these logistics that people have to meet. And that seems to separate you even further and further from once you put people at home and once you don't have unions for some of these people. Do you feel like automation as well and AI is also dehumanizing people and creating a bigger rift that's going to be a lot harder to overcome if we don't do something about it now?
I write about the telecommunications industry in Disconnected, the book that we're talking about. And there's been automation in that industry for 60 years. There
Wow.
used to be 250,000 women, and they were all women, who connected telephone calls for people who were operators. And now they're none. So technology takes jobs, changes the nature of jobs. And that always happens. But technology does not determine how jobs are done. That's the nature of the power relations in the workplace itself. Managers, not you, but many managers, particularly in big companies, they want to control what's done. And the people who do the work, they want to control how they do it. And so there's a challenge there. And it can be a creative challenge. But what's happening is that our larger society, with the very weak labor laws that we have, the number of people who have collective representation through their union in the workplace has gone way, way down. In the private sector, it's less than 6% of employees. This is down from 35% 60 years ago. A third of the workforce was represented by a union. And why a union? Let's go back to the labor law that was passed in the Depression, 1935. That law stated very clearly that we needed to have a vehicle, an organization for workers, because the feeble power of one worker against the corporation that meant that there was absolutely no way for the individual workers to ensure that the value they created for their employer was in some form also shared with those who actually did the work. You need to have collective organization. It's a countervailing force. And this was part of the liberal consensus we had since the New Deal.
Yep.
But this was shot in the ground starting in around 1980 when Ronald Reagan fired the air traffic controllers, and other companies said, hey, the government did it, the federal government did it, we can get away with this too. And our labor laws are so weak that if an employer doesn't want a union, closes down a facility, fires the union activists, there's virtually no penalty. So it's been a challenge to respond. Now, reunions right now are more popular than they've been in 50 years. The polls show that something like 73% of the American public says, yes, we see a value in unions. But what's happened is when employees want a union, the employer wants to keep it out and uses the fact that they can stall, they can fire union activists, and they can close down facilities. And they make it so that the choice is not, do you want a union or no union? But in sense, do you want a union or you want to keep your job? And people need their jobs. So the kind of atomization that you were talking about is partly a function also of the larger decline of these kind of organizations in the workplace that brings people together, that builds what we in the labor movement call solidarity, a feeling of connection, that there is a common good, and that we need to be sure that our economy is not just for those billionaires at the top, but that the vast wealth that we're creating in this country, the vast wealth, is shared among all of us. That's what makes for a democracy. That's what makes for a good society. And I talk about those changes in Disconnected call center. It's not just about call center workers, but sees call center workers as kind of the canary in the coal mine for these bigger changes that are going on.
Yeah, and this is why I love having conversations with you guys, because it's so important to have people that have lived life experience when talking about this stuff. Because if you just asked, if we grabbed somebody off the street and we said, how much do you value a call center worker? They probably go, oh, I don't care. Well, why would I care about that, right? But that's because they've never been there. They've never done the job. And a lot of times we take things specifically in our government for granted because we don't see it operating behind the scenes. The NLRB recently has experienced some pushback from our current president, and as many of the departments and different third-party places and unions as well have all experienced this pushback. Does it concern you at all what this administration is doing with the NLRB and unions?
This is the most anti-union and anti-worker administration that we've had since probably McKinley.
Yeah, ironically.
Yes, the favorite of our current president. Not only is he trying to dismantle the National Labor Relations Board, the NLRB, but those folks who are screening at the airport, the TSA folks, 47,000 of them he ripped up their collective bargaining agreement and said,
Mm-hmm.
I'm just not going to recognize it. They've had a union since those screeners, within a year or two after the screeners began. Uh, Federal employees have unions. They, since the 1960s, it has been recognized that federal employees can have a union. They don't bargain over wages or benefits, but they definitely have bargaining over the working conditions and over job security. And they have an entire process. Well, because as Trump and his billionaire buddy Elon Musk have been decimating the federal workforce, the protector have been the federal unions who have said you have to follow the law. If you're going to cut people's jobs, you have to do it in the way that the law says. You have to give people due process. Well, and they've been taking the administration to court. So,
Mm-hmm.
what did the Trump administration do? It said 1 million of you are no longer covered by your unions. We're just going to invalidate that. So, a lot of us see what's been going on, particularly the tearing up of the collective bargaining agreement and the renouncing unionization of federal workers, as equivalent to what Ronald Reagan did 40 years ago with the firing of the PATCO, of the air traffic controllers. In other words, it sets a precedent for the private sector. And the private sector says, well, if the federal government is violating labor law at will, and they're just tearing up union contracts, legal documents, then we in the private sector, whether it's in auto or steel or rubber or grocery stores or
Mm-hmm.
hospitals, we're not going to follow, we're going to rip up the agreements that we have with our employees. So it's quite a challenging time. And what's at stake is both the well-being of our democracy, because you cannot have a democracy when 50% of the wealth of your country is held by 10 billionaires. And that's close to the statistic. A democracy means that not only power, but also economic power, wealth is broadly shared. And where do people learn to stand up for their rights? There are many places in our civic organizations. You mentioned the Kiwanis and the Elks, but it's also at work that people have protections and collective organization, and they learn the process of democracy. That's why this attack on union is really getting at the core of what's so important in our 250-year-old history, which is a democracy, not a theocracy,
Mm-hmm.
not a tsardom. We don't have kings.
Yep.
Of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from this earth.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love what you said, canary in a coal mine, because once again, people oftentimes don't care about something until it happens to them, until they feel the pain. Now, good people, humanist people that are still connected with people and still care, that are still empathetic, are capable of seeing those things and trying to get out in front of them. But many people in our culture do not understand something until it happens to them. So when you take something like automation, which is a concern for call center workers, people go, well, who cares? I can't stand those people anyways, man. Have you tried to get on the phone with AT&T recently? It's so painful, and it's one of these things. Oh, well, who cares? Like that's so then you have, like you said, the TSA people losing their union. Oh, I hate going to the airport anyways. Those TSA people, this. Well, slowly but surely, it makes itself closer and closer to you. The other day, I was watching a video on stream, and we saw a veteran who was talking to Chuck Grassley in Iowa. And he said, many people at the VA that I work at have been fired. He's like, me myself, luckily, I was just forced to return to the VA, and I'm not allowed to remote work anymore. He goes, that was a good outcome for me. But he actually brought up the same thing you said, and that is Trump tore up his federal protections. And he said to Chuck Grassley, he said, "Now, are you gonna tell me right now that I'm safe, that I'm secure? How do you guarantee as the person I voted for?" He goes, "How do you guarantee for me that I'm safe now?" And he couldn't answer that because, like I said, these are things, or like you said, these are things that have existed for 60 years that have been, or longer, that have protected people when corporations, oligarchs, billionaires say, we don't care about people, we care about profit. And the only thing standing between them and that profit is a union that is providing you with health benefits, time off, a good wage. And this administration obviously has chosen profits over people. I think that when we look at automation, when we look at the loss of unions, we're looking at potentially the first casualty in this current atmosphere that we have. I'm trying to use a nice word. Do you think those are the biggest things that call centers are facing, or is there something more that they're facing, something bigger than that?
We're all facing the fact that the kinds of protections that we have to ensure that we have a good life are falling apart, are going away. And that's not just because of technology. That's because the people who are in control of our big businesses, corporate leaders, have decided that what they want is to get rid of any rules that protect the rest of us. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about those TSA folks. They're there to ensure that we have safety when we fly on airplanes. And they are there to ensure that they have the kind of working conditions that allow them to do that. Think about the doctors who we were talking about.
Yep.
They want to have the kind of conditions so that they can provide good patient care. But when the rules of the game are changed by those who have economic power, so that they can do whatever they want, it affects the quality not only of the person who's doing the work, but the quality of service that the rest of us are getting. So if we had in call centers, and mind you, there are 4 million Americans who work in call centers. That's more than work in auto plants, more than work in steel plants, more than work in making airlines and all of the rest of railroads combined. It's a big job for people. We are a service economy.
Yep. There you
And
go.
I don't go do an interview where I don't hear people complaining about the quality of the customer service when they have to call. None of us want that. Mm. And certainly the people who work there want to be able to give you good service, to take the time, not to have to try and sell you things that you don't want. They want to provide good service. But when the rules of the game, both in the workplace and in the larger society, we used to have regulation of our telecom industry, and our regulators cared about the quality of service. They cared about the price, and they cared about the quality of service. Deregulation has meant those rules go away. We used to have regulation of our airlines, but that's gone away. And now when we ride on an airplane, we're squeezed into a seat we can barely fit into, and we have to pay extra for our luggage, and we have to pay extra for a little drop of piece of food. And now if you don't want to sit in the very back, by the, with everybody who's going to the toilet. You have to pay extra to sit in the middle or the front. When we had some regulations, those kind of things, we had better quality of service, and we want that. But unfortunately, we've got into this race to the bottom, which means we want low prices. And when you are therefore looking just at low prices, it means you don't want to pay people a lot, and you don't want to have rules that make sure that the customers are treated well. And
Yeah.
that's where we've come. And business is shooting itself in the foot. I am convinced that if we had quality customer service from a company over through its call centers, people would pay for that service. But
Yeah.
somehow, low price. That's what's driving everything. And with that, you boost your stock price, and you boost what the CEOs can make, and that's what's driving everything. We're in an era of what we call financial capitalism. All you care about is boosting that stock price.
Yeah. And you said the thing, and that is we are a service-based economy. Right now, big in the news, obviously, is trade deficits, trade deficits, trade deficits. But what people don't talk about is we have a trade surplus when it comes to services. We made something like $300 billion more last year than we bring in. Well, I mean, $300. We sell more than we bring in. And service industries are the future of America. And there's this lie being told right now that we're going to tear off these other countries and we're going to bring back all these industrial jobs. I've even heard mention of we're going to open the coal mines again, which certain economists have looked at and said it would cost more money to get them running, keep them running, than it would be, you wouldn't make any money off these coal mines. Not to mention, these are not jobs that we should be in the year 2025 trying to force people into coal mines to make money when there's so many other avenues to go. We've demonized education. We've told people, rightfully so, that the debt that you accrue from education is incredible and it's a negative. But instead of trying to fix that and say, hey, how about we get away from this, these compounding interest loans that end up having, more interest than the loan does over a certain amount of years, instead of doing something about that, let's force them into coal mines. Let's make them truck drivers. But as we know, automation is taking over the truck driving industry. Automation is taking over the telecom industry. And what we're seeing is, once again, like I said, a dehumanization, a disconnection from the reality of what is going on in our society as we move more towards services. And we're trying to continue to bring in this lower middle class, impoverished community to this fantasy that they'll find their place in these archaic jobs. And that's not reality. And I think that if we want to get away from what you're talking about when you say financial capitalism, we have to get away from this idea that we all need to be wealthy. We are a consumer country. We are a fast food country. We want everything that we want, and we want it now. And what people like our current president does is they promise it to people, and of course they can't follow through. So you're not going to bring back the coal industry and create all these jobs. But what you could do is focus on bettering the lives of call center workers so more people want to work within the call center industry. The byproduct of creating better jobs in the call center industry is exactly what you said. They then provide really good customer service to people. Once they provide really good customer service to people, you increase profitability because people want to buy your product because you have great customer service. And it's the idea that, once again, profit is more important than people, and that will never, ever be true. In the business that I run, in interviews that I give, I tell my potential employee, I say, the best thing that I can offer at this job We offer a really good wage, but better than that is that you work in a really good place where people care about you, they'll listen to you. I want to hear your ideas. And we don't have a union. We're mid-sized. So we don't have a union but we pay people so well that it's unnecessary. We take care of people so well that they don't ask, and unfortunately corporations aren't interested in that. They aren't interested in finding that profitability because that takes time and it takes energy and you have to try. I think that if with services being as important as they are, that if we lose the human element of that, once again, you're going to see things that you took for granted, like you said, the TSA, flights being safe. You'll see that go away. If you do the same thing with the FDA, you will just taking for granted to go to a restaurant and sit down and eat food and know that you're going to be okay and be safe. That could go away. Also, with telecommunication centers, that human element. How many times have you heard a person saying, speak to representative, speak to representative? Like they're just yelling it at their phone because of that automation, because they don't want to talk to the robot. They don't want the automated responses. They want to talk to a person that can fix their problems. How important is it to keep these service industries human?
Well, of course, many of the service jobs are all about the human interaction, whether you're talking about teachers, whether you're talking about healthcare professionals, whether you're even talking about servers in a restaurant, whether you're talking about the people who work in the telecom industry. And we will continue. I am not one who believes that AI and automation is going to take all of our jobs. I wanted to go back a little bit to what you were talking about of we're a service economy and we can't bring back these old jobs. Why is it that we think about manufacturing jobs as the good jobs that we have to bring back?
Yeah.
It's because in the 1930s, people who worked in manufacturing, auto workers, steel workers, rubber workers, said, we want to have good jobs and we're joining together and we are going to sit down and take over these factories until we get our union. And we had a lot of conflict going on in the 1930s, but eventually we got a unionized manufacturing sector. And that built the middle class in this country. And in the coming out of World War II, when Germany and Japan had basically been destroyed, the U.S. economy dominated the global economy. And our unionized manufacturing jobs were good jobs and built the middle class with good benefits and pensions and good wages. Well, then starting 1970s, Japan, Germany, the rest of Europe became very competitive with many of the manufacturing jobs in the U.S. And manufacturing companies, auto companies, steel companies said, let's go abroad and find cheaper labor to produce things. In the meantime, service jobs, many of them are dependent upon those, what one could call production jobs, making things, whether you're an accountant, a lawyer, or those whose tax money benefits you, the health profession, education. We do need to have a production component of our economy. And so the question is really now, as we look at what the Trump administration is trying to do through Fortress America of having these high tariffs, is they've thrown out the concept of managed trade. How do we negotiate trade agreements that can raise living standards in poorer countries, protect environmental standards, make sure that there are are good conditions so that, if we in the United States have good environmental standards and health and safety standards, bring those up in Mexico, Bangladesh, the Philippines, whatever, and negotiate so that workers abroad can have the opportunity to organize collectively and unionize and bring up their living standards. And so manage trade agreements that can benefit both U.S. workers in whatever industry and help those in lower wage countries raise their standards. That's where we need to be going, not a fortress America which ignores that we now have global supply chains.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, how do you negotiate trade agreements so that those global supply chains are not disrupted? And we can have good jobs here and good jobs abroad.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, what we're seeing is with these very, very high tariffs, it's disrupting the ability of U.S. companies who want to be able, who are dependent often on getting supplies from overseas. And we're seeing the impact right now.
Yeah.
It's
It's a
chaos.
global economy. It's we're past this point. I mean, he keeps referencing 1870 to 1913, which, if anybody would Google that time period, would find out that that was not a great time to be a middle class American. It was a great time to be an oligarch. It was a great time to be a robber baron. But between 1870 and 1913, it was not great to be a worker. It was not great to be middle class or lower middle class. It was a very unstable time. When you talk about global connections, we look at, like you said, some of these call centers are outside of the United States. We should be empathetic to how they're living, not just how we're living. We should be doing something that when I have conversations on immigration and people push back against the Biden administration's efforts on immigration and Kamala Harris, I point out that one of the things that Kamala Harris was doing during her time that people never get her credit for is that she was going to these South American countries and she was talking to them and saying, what can we do about your infrastructure? What can we do about civil unrest? What can we do for trade agreements? What can we do to invest in you, to bring your country up, so that way people here stop wanting to leave and come to ours. I'm a fan of Steven Pinker's work, and Steven Pinker believes that a rising tide lifts all boats. That by as I've said before, I came from a very, very poor area, and a lot of the negatives that are seen in our impoverished communities are based on fallacy. They think, oh, these people are just bad people. They were born this way. There's a cycle of violence and criminality that comes, and the actual truth to it is that when you're born into that negativity, when you don't have hope, when you don't have faith in America or its government, you tend to be more likely to feel as though you're not going to succeed. So you don't have incentives to not do the things that are bad for society. Now, we can talk about the healthcare system and all that stuff as well. But if we don't invest in other countries, if we don't invest in our impoverished communities, and if we don't invest in people doing jobs like telecommunications jobs or other union jobs, then eventually one day we're going to look back and we're going to say, oh, well, how did it get this bad? How did the wealth gap grow so large? How are these oligarchs, how do they have so much power? And what it's going to come down to is that we isolated ourselves. We allowed extremely powerful and extremely narcissistic people to take advantage of our silence. And that's why I think it's so great that you wrote this book. Because once again, you're not talking about, I love that you're talking about the steelworkers. I love that you're talking about the manufacturing jobs that are union jobs. Those are so important. But once again, you're talking about something that I think that people would not at all think of. Like it's not something that I thought of. One of the things I love about these interviews is that each one of these books has been something that, for the most part, I didn't know anything about. If you asked me anything about telecommunications and unions and all of those things before I read your book or had this conversation with you, I wouldn't be able to tell you a single thing about it, except for that I was really bad at selling Razzie Bailey tickets for the mounted police. I could have told you that, and that's about it. But I think when people like yourself, through your life experience, through your empathy, expose these very important problems in our society, you're not just exposing this for the telecommunication people, you're exposing it for America. And I think that there's no more important time than right now that this is happening, because right now Americans need to have a voice, and they need to speak up against any type of negativity coming from the administration about our fellow Americans, about how these people are lazy. One of the things you had said was, or one of the things I thought about when you were talking earlier was all the people that are being fired in this administration that are called bureaucrats, that are referred to as the deep state. And I've said this over and over in conversation with my subscribers, is that we were all convinced at one point that there's this immense amount of corruption, and there is corruption. There's this immense amount of waste and fraud, and there is waste and fraud. But the people that they're firing aren't the corrupt people. The people that they're firing aren't the wasteful people. The people that they're firing aren't the people committing fraud. The people that they're firing are your brother, your sister, your cousin, your uncle, your aunt. They're veterans that were in the military and gave service and protected these freedoms that we care about so much. And we have been convinced by people that care nothing about us to hate the people that we live right alongside of, and hate them enough that when they're being fired, that we celebrate their firing. And I don't think that we can get to that point in this country without some extremely bad things happening. So, first of all, thank you so much for writing a book that has educated me to something that I didn't know about. But also, if you had the chance right now, what would you say to this administration that they should do to better protect these people's rights?
They need to obey the laws. We have kings right now who are
Mm-hmm.
running our government, and they don't believe in the law, and they just need to obey the law. And if they obey the law, then we can have reasonable debate about what are the right policies.
Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please like and subscribe and hit that notification bell, and check out that video on the screen now.